War, hate speech, the rise of populist politics, a deadly pandemic, a society totally divided and possibly on the brink of collapse. Sounds like we're talking about today, right? Actually, it's all in a novel published 100 years ago, The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann.
This novel addresses issues that still concern us today, issues we still discuss with great enthusiasm or great hostility.
This novel can better explain to us problems we're currently experiencing, things that worry us.
Today, people are also taking a closer look at the book's queer elements, which have always been there.
I think it's a fascinating read and a novel that has many interpretations. It has many layers, many themes.
It's also 1,000 pages long. It's a literal literary heavyweight. So what makes it worth the read, or even a second read? The Magic Mountain's 100-year anniversary is being marked with an exhibition in Thomas Mann's hometown of Lübeck, with stage productions. Even a sequel, not written by Thomas Mann himself, obviously. But first, what's it about? Okay, let's set the scene. It's the Swiss Alps at a sanatorium. That's a kind of health resort or clinic where people think the fresh air will cure them of lung disease. And there was plenty of lung disease at the time. Thomas Mann sets his novel in 1907, when tuberculosis is still a leading cause of death in Europe. And the best treatment people can get, if they can afford it, is breathing good air and just waiting around to get better. And they can wait a long time. Enter the story's young hero, Thomas Mann's main character, who goes to visit his sick cousin.
We meet this character, Hans Castorp, who travels into this world and ends up staying for 7 years, and is confronted with all the ideological, political, and philosophical debates of the time.
What's funny about the book is, even though Hans Castorp is actually healthy, he really gets into the sanatorium, the people, their philosophical debates, and just the culture of being a patient there. The strict health routines, luxurious meals, obsessive temperature taking. He ends up living like one of them.
And then, in an isolated, hermetically sealed place, the questions of humanity are played out on all possible levels. Illness, progress, science, love plays a major role. Death is very present.
So all the big topics. And Thomas Mann creates two characters, patients at the clinic, who really are polar opposites in their philosophies. Settembrini, on the one hand, he stands for progress and individual freedom, for enlightenment. Then there's NAFTA. He wants to see society dominated by a totalitarian regime. Totalitarian regimes were starting to take power in Europe at that time with the rise of communism and fascism.
Hans Castorp is caught between these two. The whole novel revolves around the decision, which side to take.
Both these characters become Hans Castorp's mentors, and he's really torn between their two philosophies. Eventually, their explosive debates turn violent. The two rivals face off in a duel. And that's just the beginning of the violence. The book ends in 1914 with the start of World War I and Hans Castorp disappearing into the chaos of battle. When The Magic Mountain came out, it quickly became an international bestseller, translated into many different languages. And over the decades, influential people have claimed it as their favorite book, like American critic Susan Sontag, who said she'd read it 7 or 8 times. In Spain, big fan clubs cropped up at schools and universities.
You don't have to have 3 doctorates in Nietzsche to understand Thomas Mann, because there's a lot of irony and humour in his work. It's about very serious things, but the book itself is an enjoyable experience. And there are some really hilarious scenes.
One group of people who didn't think The Magic Mountain was funny was the tourism board in Davos, Switzerland. They thought the book made the town look bad. They actually asked another big German writer of the time, Erich Kästner, to write a novel that painted the town in a better light. Thomas Mann led quite a life. Born in 1875 at the beginning of the German Empire, his diaries reveal that he was bisexual at a time when that was not accepted. In 1929, he won the Nobel Prize for his novel Buddenbrooks. Later, he fled Nazi Germany with his wife Katja, a Jewish convert to Christianity. and their 6 kids. But let's take a step back. In 1912, Katja Mann had been diagnosed with tuberculosis, and Thomas Mann went to visit her at a sanatorium in Davos, Switzerland. That became his inspiration.
With Mann, it's all coincidences. We imagine he must have sat there for years thinking about how to do it, but it's all coincidence.
He originally wanted to write The Magic Mountain as a short story,
And it turned into a 1,000-page novel.
and it took him 12 years to write it. He was interrupted by World War I, but also he was going through a shift in his own mindset. When he started writing the book, he was very pro-war.
In 1914, Thomas Mann allowed himself to be carried away by the enthusiasm for war that was driving many intellectuals, authors, writers, and artists at the time. So he was in the front line of advocating for it. And in 1918, when Germany was defeated, it was a lost cause and he wound up very isolated.
Thomas Mann switched sides. In the 1920s, he became one of the most eloquent defenders of the Republic, and by the 1930s, during his exile in the United States, a true believer in democracy.
When the Nazis came to power in 1933, Thomas Mann left Germany with his family. He moved to Switzerland, then to the United States, and later back to Switzerland. Thomas Mann advocated for tolerance and human dignity until he died in 1955. When Thomas Mann wrote The Magic Mountain, he was thinking about his own process of political transformation. He puts a lot of the old him, the pro-war him that he distanced himself from, into the character of Nafta.
What impresses me most about Thomas Mann is his honest and sincere willingness and courage to change his mind, to put his views to the test again and again, and arrive at new views, and to stand up for those new views until he revises them again. The Magic Mountain reflects exactly that.
When The Magic Mountain came out in 1924, European society was really on edge. There's this feeling, like today actually, of restlessness, of heightened tensions, existential dread, and the feeling that society could go off the rails.
What was in the air, he writes in the novel. You can sense a tremendous unease, a fear of the future. And suddenly there's this situation at the end of the novel where things are unraveling, where they start hitting each other, where they're cursing at the staff, where the craziest ideas emerge, and people are literally losing their minds.
Thomas Mann writes about total polarization, divisions, people who stopped listening to each other.
We're at that exact tipping point today in this time of great irritability. All you have to do is turn on any evening talk show and you'll see that people are interrupting each other, not listening, just yelling out opinions.
Mann sees politics falling into populism and what we now call hate speech and disinformation. He sees the tensions and the dangers that are later going to lead to the fall of the Weimar Republic, Germany's first attempt at a real parliamentary democracy that ended with the Nazi era.
You can follow it in vivid detail. He describes it with a tremendous aesthetic sense and tremendous psychological insight.
He creates an atmosphere where, at the end, you just wonder who will shoot first. First in the duel, and then at the very end, the war in which the whole thing culminates.
Who shoots first? Even today, we see people turning to violence when they can't get their way with words.
I think it's sadly current. We should keep that in mind, and not in a good way. It's been a century, 100 years, and we're still at the same place.
At the end of The Magic Mountain, Thomas Mann asks, out of this universal feast of death, out of this extremity of fever, kindling the rain-washed evening sky to a fiery glow, may it be that love one day shall mount.
Humanity should be ashamed that we still haven't answered the book's great final question. Out of this universal feast of death, may it be that love one day shall mount? This question about the horrible 20th century, the 21st century, is starting the exact same way with the next universal feast of death in Ukraine and the Middle East.
Mann was also ahead of his time when it came to sexuality. His earlier novellas, Tonio Krüger and Death in Venice, had strong homoerotic undertones. The Magic Mountain contains motifs that are obviously queer.
It's one of the book's greatest strengths, that it breaks every cliché, especially when it comes to questions of how to talk about the body, sexuality and eroticism.
Hans Castorp falls in love with a woman, Madame Chauchat, but she reminds him of a male classmate that he once fancied.
The question of what a man is, what a woman is, what's masculine, what's feminine, and what is perceived as attractive, erotically attractive, all of that is fluid here.
Gender fluidity was not mainstream in Thomas Mann's day, and homosexuality was totally taboo for most of society.
It was a criminal offence. In the 1920s, Thomas Mann campaigned against paragraph 175, which criminalised homosexual relationships and acts.
Thomas Mann's own desire for men was something he lived out in secret. To the outside world, he was an upstanding heterosexual citizen with a wife and 6 kids. Love, hate, politics, and passion, they're all here in the Magic Mountain. Thomas Mann leaves it up to you, though, how you want to interpret them.
We have to find our own way, just like the characters in the story. And I think that in times of fake news and everything happening quickly, this idea of having to read with critical eyes and do that for ourselves and stay awake, that is the most current thing, and that's what I like the best.
And in case the idea of reading 1,000 pages seems overwhelming,
You can always skip ahead. Lots of readers have told me which parts they skipped.
so let's get to it. What fascinates you most about the Magic Mountain? Let us know in the comments.